I am delighted to introduce Nicholas Rowe, Wardlaw Professor of English Literature at St Andrews University in Scotland, and very distinguished professor. His Wordsworth and Coleridge, The Radical Years, originally 1988, just recently revised and updated, was really inspired myself and a whole generation of other scholars to looking really seriously at Thelwall's relation to the Romantic movement, and incredibly inspiring, but only one of many other inspiring and real range of biographies and studies, including two of John Keats, study and a biography, the first life of Leigh Hunt called Fiery Heart, and he co-founded the scholarly journal Romanticism, which makes me feel it's just approaching its 30th anniversary, and Fellow of the British Academy, Fellow of Royal Society of Edinburgh, Honorary Fellow of the English Association, Lifetime Member of the Japan Association for English Romanticism, Honorary Professor of English at Jiaotong Liverpool University in China, Chair of the Keats Foundation, a Trustee of the Wordsworth Conference Foundation. So a very distinguished, well-traveled, very well-written scholar, and we're all very excited to hear him today.
Well, thanks very much, Judith. It's a real pleasure to be here today to speak about John Thelwall, and I'm grateful to Peter Kitson, my old friend from many decades ago, not only for organising this, but for asking me to speak to you today. I'm going to be talking about John Thelwall in relation to Norwich, obviously enough, but I'm also going to bring into the frame William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge, some of the Norwich radicals, and also William Godwin, the author of Political Justice, father of Mary Shelley, who became Mary Shelley, husband of Mary Wollstonecraft. John Thelwall at Pontic Hill. It's not working. Unless we can use this.
She says, hang on a sec.
There we go. You see up there?
Yeah, so you just have to click that, right? Get it on the thing. Click that. You have an issue.
Okay, John Thelwall at Pontic Hill. I hope this is going to work. There's a portrait of him from the National Portrait Gallery in London, but I really want to start with, which one do I press?
Well, let's try this other one. I've got another one. Get all the issues over and done first. Just bear with us for a minute or two. There we go. Come on, you can do it. They're all deciding not to work. Hang on.
I'll start again in a minute.
Sorry about that, everybody.
So what are you clicking on this?
There, so it's working now. So
Okay.
just forwards and backwards there.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah.
So there we are, just a portrait to give you a sense of his likeness, but I really want to begin with this. This is the weathercock at Liswyn in South Wales, where John Thelwall lived, I think, for some 5 years at the end of the 1790s. He lived on a farm there and was contemplating a life of rural retreat. I put this here because, of course, the weathercock on Liswyn Church gets into Wordsworth's poem Anecdote for Fathers, written down there at Alfoxden House in Somerset, where Wordsworth was, who had met Thelwall on many occasions, was living for a year, July 1797 through to July 1798. and obviously thinking about Thelwall as he wrote this poem. So that's to give you a kind of sense of the geographical bearings that I'm going to be talking about. Norwich, obviously, but also London, and also Netherstowey and Alfoxden House down there in Somerset, where Coleridge and Wordsworth were at work on lyrical ballads. And I want to begin the lecture proper with an advertisement. Here it is from the Bath Chronicle and Weekly Gazette in June 1797. Tucked away on the second page was this advertisement, and you can read it through, so I don't need to go into it in very much detail. 30 acres of rich pasture, meadow and orcharding, situated within 4 miles of Stowey and 12 of Bridgewater, commanding a most beautiful and extensive view of the Bristol Channel, which comes within 2 miles of it, and the Welsh coast across the Severn estuary. Alfoxden House, you want to see what it looked like in an 18th century view. This is a very early picture of the house in which Wordsworth and his sister Dorothy were living during this year. That the advertisement appeared in a Bath newspaper indicates perhaps that Mrs. St. Albin, who owned the house, hoped to attract a wealthy tenant from the city who might enjoy the prestige of a country seat. As it turned out, there were no inquiries, and the house was still available for rent when William and Dorothy Wordsworth arrived at Netherstowey in July of 1797, beginning the year that would see the composition of lyrical ballads and Dorothy Wordsworth's Alfoxden Journal. Wordsworth and his sister Dorothy there. They signed the lease on the 7th of July and moved in about 9 days later. Certainly they were in residence when John Thelwall arrived on the 7th of July, on the 17th of July, at the end of a long walk that had taken him out of London to Windsor, Basingstoke, Andover, on to Salisbury, Amesbury, Stonehenge and Salisbury Plain, Winterbourne, Stoke, Wylye, Fonthill, Wardour Castle, Mere, Frome, Bristol and Bath, then on to Alfoxden and the Pontic Hills. That excursion was the latest in a series of forays that Thelwall had made from London during the preceding year. And as Thelwallians know, between May and August of 1796, Thelwall had visited Norwich at the invitation of Amelia Alderson. Here she is. This is a slightly later portrait of Amelia, Unitarian, poet, novelist and playwright, who was well connected with dissenting and reformist circles in Norwich and London. Back in June of 1794, Amelia Alderson had met William Godwin, here he is, for the first time. Finding the philosopher of political justice, that's his famous philosophical work from 1793, dressed in a rather unphilosophical costume, a new sharp-toed red Morocco slippers, a green coat and crimson underwaistcoat with his hair bien poudré. He received me very kindly, she recalled, and they both subsequently attended the trials of Thomas Hardy, John Horne-Tooke and John Thelwall at the Old Bailey. Those are the treason trials of late 1794. Godwin's diary lists frequent meetings with Alderson. This gives you the frequency. This is from the William Godwin Diary online resource, which if you haven't explored, it is worth a look. There's all sorts of information there. And you can see these are the meetings starting in 1794 and then very frequently 1795 through about 1797. London gossip reported that Godwin had fallen in love with her. His letter to Alderson of 8th September 1796 does indeed express uncommon esteem for her merits and a high degree of pleasure at having recently seen her at Norwich. Be that as it may, Alderson was unquestionably associated with Godwin's circle in London, And on at least one occasion, this is Godwin's writing, 31st of March 1795, Godwin met with Wordsworth in the morning. Here he is, Wordsworth and N, that means Matthews, but you've got the name Wordsworth there. And in the evening, he dined with Alderson at Thelwall's. Here we are at Thelwall's with so-and-so, William Friend, Coleridge's tutor at Cambridge, George Dyer, and Alderson. There.
Excuse me, sir. Excuse me, sir. Remember that the microphone's for everybody at home.
I'm shouting. This conjunction linking Wordsworth with Godwin, Alderson and Thelwall is significant and really orients the whole paper. It helps to explain two short articles in the Morning Herald and the Norfolk Chronicle that record a so-called Godwin School, Bridgewater, during October 1797. And my paper this morning aims to provide some contexts for this article and to explain its significance. I'm grateful to Steve Poole for alerting me to the Morning Herald version of this article, which I'll explain in the course of what I've got to say. Now, as you'll all know, violent intimidation and the repressive two bills of December 1795 meant that public speaking in London and elsewhere was risky and sometimes dangerous. Thelwall's response was to arm himself with a pistol and head out of town to continue his lecturing in the provinces. Like William Godwin, who was by birth an East Anglian, Thelwall had numerous contacts in reformist and dissenting circles in Norwich. A talented, earnest and brilliant coterie, which came as near as any other in England, except perhaps the Birmingham Lunar Society, to one of those provincial academies of contemporary France, which did so much to endow the 18th century Enlightenment with its humanity and its social significance. That is Albert Goodwin in his brilliant study of radical and reformist circles in Britain. The Friends of Liberty came out in the 1970s. For many decades, Norwich had been a centre of Protestant dissent, and the years of the French Revolution saw the city become a centre of intellectual Jacobinism. Since 1790, the Norwich Revolution Society, founded by William Taylor, dissenter, reformist, important translator, and a poet in his own right, had been contributing to the national campaign for parliamentary reform led by the London Corresponding Society and its affiliated organisations. Originally strenuous Foxite Whigs, during the 1790s, members of the society at Norwich became enthusiastic champions of the French Revolution. They numbered about 2,000, it is said, and among them were, of course, Amelia Alderson, John Barnard, dissenter and reformist, John Cousins, a grocer, William Enfield, Unitarian minister, Joseph Kinghorn, Baptist preacher and scholar, John March, the printer and stationer, publisher of the Cabinet, John Pitchford, businessman and contributor to the Cabinet, Anne Plumtree, writer and translator, Edward Rigby, physician and another contributor to the Cabinet, Isaac Saint, the secretary of the Society, landlord of the Pelican Pub, arrested in May 1794 and examined by the Privy Council, John Sims, a chemist, John Taylor, a businessman, William Taylor and Mark Wilkes, a farmer and Baptist minister. I'm sure you know all of these individuals as locals. All of these individuals were encountered by or known to Thelwall and Godwin, who between 1794 and 7 were frequent visitors to Norwich. And here we have the first advertisement for John Thelwall's lectures at Norwich. This appeared on the 14th of May, 1796 in the Norfolk Chronicle. I don't need to read it out. It's all obvious enough, I think. This is a preliminary announcement advising readers that a further notice will follow, as indeed it did. Well, there he is, a week later, setting out lectures on classical history at the old Assembly Room in the King's Arms Yard near Gurney's Bank, Norwich. And again, you can see exactly what is on offer here. Again, this is from the Norfolk Chronicle. This advertisement signalled the first in a series of some 22 lectures on classical history, in which Thelwall used the examples of ancient Greece and Rome as a cover for reviving discussion of contemporary politics, much as Coleridge said he used his Unitarian sermons to spread a sort of sanctity over his sedition. But with a general election due on Wednesday, the 25th of May, it was impossible for Thelwall to remain silent. He sided with an opposition candidate, the Quaker banker Bartlett Gurney, against the two sitting MPs for the city, Henry Hobart, who was a Tory, and William Wyndham, who was a Whig turned Burkean alarmist. "We have got Thelwall," grocer Thomas Hawkins reported. "He have begun to lecture. I'm going to hear him this evening. He is to give us a digression on the Constitution and the fate of Poland. I heard him last evening from the leads of Mr. Cousins's shop in the marketplace. He is a most powerful speaker. I suppose, and this seems unrealistic, I suppose between 4,000 and 5,000 people heard every word distinctly, and he gave Wyndham a most severe trimming." That was the reason I put this image here. It's obviously a detail from the Copenhagen Fields image that you've already seen, but it gives you an idea of Thelwall in action. The leads of Mr. Cousins's shop was an area of flat roofing over the shop's bow windows, from where Thelwall would be visible and readily heard by the crowd in the marketplace. Despite Thelwall's campaigning, Gurney came in marginally behind the two other candidates. So moving on to another entry in Godwin's diary, this is a note that shows us him arriving in Norwich, 5th of July 1796, and gives you a list of the people that he met on his arrival. Robert Merry, who was a penniless Delacruscan poet, whose debts Godwin hoped to cancel. We've got John March, the publisher, Edward Rigby, Dr. James Alderson, the father of Amelia, John Sims, John Pitchford, John Thelwall, and a schoolmaster called Smith. Godwin was therefore moving at the centre of reformist life in Norwich, and had coincided there with Thelwall, who was an old, if quarrelsome, London acquaintance. Thereafter they met on the 9th and the 10th of July, and although Godwin's diary does not mention Thelwall's lectures, his diary rarely records events, it seems at least possible that he attended at least some of them. On the 14th of July, when Godwin was in town, Thelwall celebrated the destruction of the Bastille and lectured that evening to a vast concourse of people on the causes of the Roman and French revolutions. Presumably his other lectures were as well received, although when he tried to offer a series of 6 lectures on the revolutions of Rome at a seafront venue in Yarmouth, the reception was less than welcoming. On Friday the 19th of August, the lecture meeting was attacked and violently broken up by sailors deliberately put ashore from HMS Espiegel, which was actually a captured French sloop. The Norfolk Chronicle had been covering Thelwall's lectures at Norwich and now published an edited version of a much longer account of an affray at Yarmouth that had appeared in the London Courier on the 22nd of August. Now, you've got this on the handout, It's the handout that has the tiny writing. I've done that so I fit it all onto a single double-sided piece of A4 paper. I'm not going to read all of this out, but I will read a couple of extracts just so you can get a sense of this. So this is the report about Yarmouth on August the 20th, starting with the second paragraph. On Friday night, upwards of 200 auditors of both sexes and all ages assembled, and the lecture proceeded for some time with the utmost tranquillity. At length, a great disturbance was heard at the door, and in rushed about 90 sailors from the different ships of war in the roads, armed with bludgeons and cutlasses. After having cut and knocked down the persons who guarded the door, they poured in among the audience, who, totally unprepared for resistance, were knocked down across the benches with terrible wounds and bruises and many fractured heads. Garments covered with blood were shortly exhibited. In the midst of this scuffle, the lights were knocked out by some of the sailors, and darkness and horror, shrieks and groans, clashings of weapons and resounding blows filled the room. At length, some people without tore open a pair of large folding doors, and the people began to rush out, pursued by some of the sailors, while others began to cry out, "Where's the parson? Damn him, where's the parson?" So that gives you a sense of the occasion. Another passage from the same report. In the meantime, some of the townspeople collected and recognized him, exclaiming, "It is Thelwall, let us rescue him." And immediately rushing forward, knocked down the man who was on the right hand and grappled with those who were on the other side, endeavoring to drag him towards the sea. At the same time, Thelwall, clapping a pistol to the head of the most resolute of them and exclaiming, "Offer the least violence and you're a dead man," they let go their hold and escaped to the house of Mr. Norton. Further extracts from the Courier version also appeared on Monday the 22nd in the Morning Chronicle, the Sun and the London Chronicle. And in the Norfolk Chronicle, Yarmouth August 20 was immediately followed by a column of loyalist bluster addressed to the inhabitants of Great Yarmouth. And again, I'm just going to give you an extract from towards the end of this long address, which I think is interesting because it's focusing on the significance of Thelwall's visit and what he represented. One advantage, my friends, may perhaps be derived from Mr. Thelwall's visit to this town. He may be considered as the touchstone of political opinions. He draws the line between loyalty and disaffection, for I defy any of his adherents in whom the madness of democracy has not stifled the voice of conscience to lay their hands upon their hearts and say that they are real friends to their king and the constitution of their country. With a perfect conviction of the general loyalty and good sense of this town, and with a sincere attachment to its inhabitants, I beg leave to subscribe myself the determined enemy of sedition and their faithful friend and fellow subject. God save the king. So, loyal to crown, king and constitution, this enthusiast claimed to have seen through Thelwall's specious veil of classical illusion and revealed him as the touchstone of political opinions. That is, a figure whose opinions tested the loyalism or disaffection of others. Controversial, divisive, Thelwall was confronted with outright violence throughout 1796. Gathered by the Hurry family of Yarmouth, all of them staunch Whigs, a series of depositions by locals who attended Thelwall's lecture on the 19th of August gives us a sense of the scale and ferocity of this violence. And these, of course, are the documents that the Thelwall Society has donated to the Record Office, and they're all in the back room there on display. They give us, as I say, a sense of the scale and ferocity of the violence. The assailants were armed with sticks or bludgeons and began to strike and continued striking at every person in the room, men, women, and children, says one witness. John Bell of Great Yarmouth described how he was knocked down in the street or roadway by two of the sailors who wounded him severely on the head, and when on the ground, he received several blows with sticks or bludgeons on his arms, on his back, on his shoulders, and a violent one on his left hand. Bell admitted that he was expecting to be killed, and faced with this kind of brutality, we can readily understand why Thelwall had decided to carry a firearm. Undeterred by the Yarmouth bustle, Thelwall opted to continue his lectures. He completed all 6 of the Yarmouth presentations on Friday the 26th of August, and later attempted to lecture at Godwin's birthplace, Wisbeach, on Saturday the 17th of September. This event was apparently publicised on handbills, and it was supposed to take place on the town's bowling green. But failing in every attempt to procure public accommodation, Thelwall was at the castle in which he began to lecture to a select party, we're told. Once again, however, this meeting was broken up by loyal inhabitants, by beat of drum and loud huzzas to our good king and our happy constitution. The following Thursday, the 22nd of September, he spoke at King's Lynn, where he was grossly insulted by the populace, and he retreated to London, where on the 2nd of October, he met William Godwin again. And this is the occasion. You can see here Thelwall's name mentioned there, which gives us Thelwall's return to London. It was on this occasion that he was obliged to leave his home and his lecture hall in Beaufort Buildings on the Strand, and in the same month he ceased to publish his newspaper, The Tribune, in which he'd been publishing the texts of his lectures. Thelwall made further attempts to speak at Derby on the 6th of March 1797, where a riot of a serious nature forced him to brandish his pistol once again, and at Stockport in May, where they tried to duck the orator in the canal. Passing through Ashby de la Zouche, he was attacked by a mob of soldiers and loose people, and when he arrived back at Norwich on the 27th of May 1797 to resume his classico-political lectures, the Inniskilling dragoons garrisoned in the city wrecked the Shakespeare Inn, as I think Peter mentioned a moment ago. Thelwall was once again obliged to escape to London and commented later, "Such was the conclusion of my political career." But of course, it wasn't the end of Thelwall's story. The violence that Thelwall encountered in East Anglia, 1796-7, gave momentum to his epic July 1797 journey to Somerset, to Nether Stowey, and the pasture, meadow, and orcharding of Alfoxden House. So we're back across country, now in the company not of Godwin, but of Coleridge, Wordsworth, and his sister. For months over these years, Samuel Taylor Coleridge's letters to Thelwall had set up a constant refrain of insistent invitations for Thelwall to come to Somerset. This is Coleridge, you can see, of course. Thelwall himself could understand the attractions of taking a house, as the Wordsworths had recently done, in order to settle in what he called philosophic amity with Coleridge, with Thomas Poole, Wordsworth, and his sister. And he wrote a marvelous poem called Lines Written at Bridgewater that wishfully sets a scene of life with the poets at Nether Stowey. And I'll read out a few lines from this. It's written in blank verse, and it is in many ways a kind of prototype for Coleridge's famous conversation poems. Poems like Frost at Midnight and This Lime Tree Bower My Prison and The Nightingale, which was published in Lyrical Ballads in 1798. Thelwall's poem is in many ways the pattern for what Coleridge went on to do in later months. He wishfully sets a scene where, with kindly interchange of mutual aid, we delve our little garden plots, the while sweet converse flows, suspending oft the arm and half-driven spade, while eager one propounds and listens one, weighing each pregnant word and pondering fit reply that may untwist the knotty point, perchance of import high, of moral truth. So just a few lines there to give you, I suppose, the flavour of the poem as a whole. Lines that are focusing on kindness and interchange, flow and suspense, propounding and listening and weighing words for fit reply. We can sense how for Thelwall, this carefully scripted scenario of verbal exchange was loaded with memories of uproar and violence, sticks and bludgeons, and everything that we've already encountered in the lecture room at Yarmouth. Thelwall evidently anticipated a community of intellectual exchange and shared physical endeavour, where suspending the arm and the half-driven spade might create a space for sweet converse. And it's notable, I think, how the sibilance of Thelwall's lines contrasts with the jarring rhetoric of Yarmouth, cut, knocked down, fractured, clashings of weapons and resounding blows. One can readily understand how such a mutually supportive community would have appealed to Thelwall after his experiences in London and in East Anglia. But a life of philosophic amity would in actuality prove as unrealistic as the poet's projected idealistic community of pantisocracy, and indeed Thelwall's idea that the citizens of Norwich and Yarmouth were a most agreeable and intelligent circle of society, men of real moderation. Well, Norwich and Yarmouth had other citizens too. Evidently aware of Thelwall's East Anglian experiences, on the 21st of August 1797, Coleridge wrote requesting him to delay his return to Stowey, on the grounds that even riots and dangerous riots might be the consequence. And Steve and I were wondering last night what the boundary between a riot and a dangerous riot might in fact be. So it was that a series of classico-political lectures delivered amid scenes of public unrest at Norwich, at Yarmouth and elsewhere had impelled Thelwall into deepest Somerset, yet ultimately rendered it impossible for him to settle and live there with the poets. That was not, however, the end of the story. In mid-August 1797, as I'm sure some of you know, a government agent appeared at Nether Stowey. He was actually called James Walsh, and Coleridge nicknamed him Spy Nosy. And the arrival of the spy caused a sensation in the village. Having discounted local reports that the inhabitants of Alfoxden House were French people, Walsh offered his own view of the situation. I think this will turn out no French affair, but a mischievous gang of disaffected Englishmen, he reported back to London. There was a nest of them at Alfoxden House. And there the matter has usually rested with Thelwall and eventually Coleridge and the Wordsworths, taking their separate paths away from their curious Somerset coincidence. Another view of what went on at Netherstowey in the summer of 1797 is, however, available. It transports us back across England from the West Country pasture, meadow and orcharding at Alfoxden, back to East Anglia, to Norwich and the Norfolk Chronicle, in which Thelwall's exploits were continuing to feature. And this is the article. Mr. Thelwall and some half dozen of others of the Godwin school have formed themselves into a society of theo-philanthropists. The idea is borrowed from the French, the article goes on, and the name imports respect for the divinity and affection to mankind. They have taken a house at the foot of Pontic Hill, beyond Bridgewater, to the no small consternation of the folks of that neighbourhood. So that is the article from the Norfolk Chronicle, but there is another version of it that I'm going to alert you to. It was published as a news item on the 7th of October 1797. And its mention of the Godwin School taking a house beyond Bridgewater was already several months out of date. But a longer version of the article had already appeared in the London Morning Herald on the 30th of September. And this version of the story is a little longer, and you can see it here. And it concludes, "The Jermyn, they say, drink nothing but water. They stay at home all day, and at night get up the hill where they lie on their backs and view the stars through long poles." The general opinion was at first divided, and the point contested was whether they were conjurers or spies. The latter opinion has of late been most prevalent, as one of the party was actually detected in the fact of reading a French grammar. Given that Thelwall had numerous contacts and correspondence in London and Norwich, as we've seen, it is perhaps reasonable to surmise that separately from these press reports, news of his westerly migration had been circulating for some time. The idea of Thelwall enrolled as a member of the Godwin School is completely fanciful. Intellectually, the two men had almost nothing in common. The Herald and the Chronicle newspaper reports most likely reflected an awareness that Godwin and Thelwall had coincided at Norwich in July 1796 in company, as we've seen, with local radicals and dissenters. Having been driven out of the city by riots, the Godwin School, as embodied by Thelwall and some half dozen others, had relocated across country and reformed in Somerset beyond Bridgewater. Godwin himself was of course not there, and that the half dozen others in the school are unnamed suggests a limit to the information on which the article was based. In any case, by 1797, Coleridge and Wordsworth were certainly no longer admirers of Godwin's political justice. So who were the theo-philanthropists? Following the revolution of 18 Fructidor in Paris, 4th of September 1797, theo-philanthropy had emerged as a new religious worship, a sect of deistic social worshippers who were lovers of God and man, whose belief in divinity was combined with some kind of social responsibility. Now, there's a Norwich dimension to all of this, because William Taylor had published a review of the Manual of the Theo-Philanthropists in the December 1797 issue of the London Monthly Review. And this suggests that theo-philanthropy may have been a topic of conversation in Norwich intellectual circles at the time when the Norfolk Chronicle published its sketch of Thelwall and the Society of Theophilanthropists. Cartoon. This was all some months before James Gilray's brilliant new morality cartoon depicted the reform movement, including John Thelwall, William Godwin, Coleridge, Charles Lamb, and Robert Southey, as theophilanthropists, paying homage to the leader of the French Directory, Louis-Marie de la Rivière Le Poe, and that's him you can see right over on the right there. Here's Thelwall, Charles James Fox, Joseph Priestley, and here are Coleridge and Southey disguised as donkeys. Whether ye make the rights of man your theme, your country libel and your God blaspheme, or dirt on private worth and virtue throw, still blasphemous and blackguard, praise Le Poe. That is in fact from the text of a poem that is written out underneath the cartoon as it was originally published. Significant here is the suggestion that theophilanthropy was morally and spiritually questionable, an issue that also surfaces in the Norfolk Chronicle article. They have taken a house at the foot of Pontic Hill, beyond Bridgewater, to the no small consternation of the folks of that neighbourhood. Pontic Hill evidently alludes to the Quanticks, and may be intended to remind readers that an old sense of the word Pontic meant sour and astringent. By implication, the ideas and opinions of the so-called Godwin school are too. At Norwich, the phrase Pontic Hill would also recall Thelwall speaking on Greek and Roman history. Pontic denotes the ancient Hellenistic kingdom of Pontus on the southern coast of the Black Sea, as well as the Pontic Greek dialect of that region. Again, the insinuation may be that Thelwall's lectures and other writings of the Godwin school are as unintelligible to most people as Pontic Greek. Although William Godwin's diary documents his wide circle of friends and acquaintances, there was never an identifiable Godwin school of like-minded thinkers and admirers of political justice. Godwin certainly relished discussion and debate, for example, at the Philomathian Society in London, although many, such as Thelwall and Coleridge, found him a difficult and dogmatic interlocutor. In any case, by 1797, the period when Godwin had blazed like a sun in the firmament of reputation, circa 1793 to 5, was firmly in the past. Even William Wordsworth, much in Godwin's company early in 1795, had moved on intellectually and creatively. Sadly, too, the article about the Godwin School beyond Bridgewater came almost a month after the death of Godwin's wife, Mary Wollstonecraft, 10th of September, 1797. So, to close up this paper, the Morning Herald and Norfolk Chronicle reports may be little more than amusing footnotes to Thelwall's career circa 1796 to 7, a period when, for those at Norwich, Thelwall and Godwin may have appeared to be close associates, so much so indeed that the idea of Thelwall beyond Bridgewater was sufficient to conjure up Godwin's presence too. In another view, however, the idea of a Godwin school beyond Bridgewater parallels Thelwall's surmise that life at Stowey was a kind of philosophic symposium, and Spinoza's report that the Stowey community amounted to a mischievous gang of disaffected Englishmen. All three of those conjectures missed the mark, in that they were recollections of connections, communities, and commitments of former years. Still, all of that being said, the Morning Herald and Norfolk Chronicle reports of Thelwall at Pontic Hill are significant public acknowledgements that something was indeed very much going on beyond Bridgewater. The publication of the poems in Lyrical Ballads in September of 1798 would cause profound consternation among literary folks, although, as we all know, that was news for the future.